Hello, good evening, everybody, and or afternoon if it's still afternoon. It's still bright and sunshiny. Thanks very much for coming along and being part of this afternoon's webinar. I'd like to briefly introduce the panel to you. We're very pleased to have Tim Bennett-Hart from RSL Awards, James Manwaring from Director of Music from Windsor Learning Partnership. If you can just give us a wave, James. Thank you very much. Chris Fower from Warwick Music, and Roger Wilson from Black Lives in Music. We're looking at a fairly positive response and discussion of the model music curriculum and how it can best be built upon for the benefit of students and everybody, and how that interrelates with the work of the music industry. Let's start with a question about music technology. How can the teachers delivering the curriculum best be empowered to utilize music technology and technology in teaching music from Key Stage 1 up? Who wants to start us off?
I'm happy to start. Hi everybody, nice to meet you over the Zoom. Empowering teachers. I guess one thing I think about kind of what empowers me, and I guess it's seeing the impact of something on students. You know, we can all see a nice, cool, shiny product or bit of software, which is great. But when you actually see the impact of it on a class, I'm not just talking about results, but just the joy of learning or the engagement. That for me is quite empowering, because then you think, oh, okay, this is worth investing in. This is worth pursuing. And you know, time is always precious in teaching. So it's so I guess empowering teachers is kind of just sharing the impact of what we do with whether it be with technology or even just a song idea. You know, if I'm going to do a song with a choir, I want to know, did it work? Did they all enjoy it or not? So and I think you can do that from a young age. You can see something working and you can see impact, and I yeah, that's kind of how I'm empowered. So that's how I like to try and empower others as well.
Would anybody like to add to James's excellent contribution?
I'd love to say a little something about music technology, as my background was in music technology to a large extent. And but first of all, I should frame this by saying that I think the initial sort of aim of the model music curriculum, I think most people agree, is a positive one. You know, the aim is to ensure that, I can read this actually, the MMC is to ensure a universal provision of music education for all pupils in all schools. I mean, that's just fantastic, isn't it? And, you know, what a great opportunity to kind of be at the center of music as it has a, again, they use the word renaissance, don't they, within this. Fantastic, really, really good. I think music technology with a capital M and a capital T, Chris, is a great way of getting students hooked into the idea of making music in the first place. And I think there is a sort of disappointing element to the model music curriculum, which is that isn't really grasped in all its glory. To actually acknowledge that music, it can be made in a valid way using all forms of different types of technology, and that making music using a computer is just as great as making music with a trombone, for example. You know, these are fantastic ways of making music, and actually, as grown-ups thinking about students, we perhaps didn't ought to make judgments about how people enjoy music. We ought to let them enjoy music for the sake of enjoying music, and let their intrigue and their intuition guide them into how to really kind of love a subject which we clearly all really, really love. So that's, I think, great intentions, bit of an opportunity missed in terms of actual music technologies as well.
And I think that plays.
I think obviously I agree, Tim. And speaking from the other side of the fence, as a kind of slightly male, stale and pale, conservatoire educated classical musician, you know, if we're going to treat music as this glorious artistic endeavor of organizing sound into emotion creating outputs, what better way to engage with structured timbre, tone, pattern at an early stage, particularly. I mean, we're talking about from key stage 1, right? Than music technology, which I capital M capital T, which I find, and found in my teaching practice to be enormously useful. And I think the other thing about empowering schools, from the schools I've worked in, is that nearly everything you need is there, right? You don't need to go and buy a wind band full of instruments. Nearly everything you need to have a successful music technology program at key stage 1 and early key stage 2 is in school already, apart from maybe a bit of software. And so empowering is freeing for me. So knowledge is freedom for teachers. So some training where needed to make teachers feel empowered to use the hardware they already have, I think would be a massive revolution in many schools, because we know that once you're on it, it's fabulous, it's easy, the kids are engaged, they love it, and the outcomes are superb. And of course, don't have to be solely within music technology. It's the blended approach then of voice, some instruments, movement, narrative, and the technology working together can be a fantastic output, And I agree, Tim, that whole game is missed, right, in this, but that's unfortunate. But the headline thing is fantastic.
I guess just jumping in on that, if I may. I mean, I think things are missed from it, and I guess I took a really positive view when I read it of like, okay, let's look at the great stuff, and I like to try and be quite a positive person, and people who know me will say that. But I guess one thing that's helpful in a sense of not mentioning technology is sometimes I find that teachers think that if they get a new bit of software, or they get a launch pad, or some bit of technology, that suddenly it's going to do everything for them. And it doesn't very often. And sometimes we end up teaching it in an unmusical way, and then you're kind of not empowering those students to take it forward. And I wonder if the exciting thing with something like the model music curriculum, but also with any set work at GCSE or anything like that, is actually starting with the music and then saying, right, where can technology come into this, or where can a trombone or a clarinet or a guitar or a voice. And I did a lesson just before lockdown using a launch pad and using Ableton, where I was getting boys to compose ground basses. It was all linked to Purcell. So we're starting off with Purcell, looking at that kind of era of music. Then we were moving to Ableton to create some bass lines and then some melodies. Then we were using a launch pad to kind of trigger it all live, which was really exciting and a great lesson. And I can't wait to do it again when students are allowed to all touch the same thing. But it's like the starting point was just this great music. Just as much as I've loved doing things like taking a rock song or a bit of musical theatre and saying, okay, well, let's put it onto some instruments that are different and play around with that. So that's maybe what we need to do, is fill in those blanks and say, right, this part of the MMC, how could we take that? What technology have you got in your school? And as you say, most schools will have something, and there are free things out there. And this is what we can do, and hopefully show teachers, break down those barriers. But there's a long way to go with that, I guess, in terms of training.
And that speaks nicely, James, to this responsive style of teaching that you were talking about before, where you're taking how the students are responding to what's happening to inform the next steps, and to then keep that engagement and interest there, which is really positive. Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I just wondered if I could come in on that, because there were a couple of things I wanted to say. First of all, the document itself, I feel, provides a fabric. It provides a fabric of understanding and a structure that hopefully can be used to create from.
Yes, yeah, it's a platform, isn't it, for development,
and build on. So the finite direction as to how you take music forward at these stages, but I do think there's a lot of good stuff in there. But I did want to pick up on a word that Chris mentioned, which was knowledge, and I think knowledge is empowering, obviously, But I think knowledge when it comes to music technology is empowering. And I think actually, you know, when you start off at Key Stage 1, for example, with the administering of lessons for young people at that level, it can be quite scary. I think, I mean, it's great to hear about what James is talking about in terms of the sessions that he's doing, which is absolutely fantastic for someone else who's not quite there with Ableton, for example, or is not quite so creative thinking. It becomes less than empowering. So I think it would be fantastic to find a way for that, for teachers to feel that they have the support to be able to take this forward, to take technology forward, because I also think, you know, when you extend that beyond Key Stage 1, 2, 3, and you look at creators who are going forward, who are using technology, I think just in the same way that you've got young people who are starting off on a piano or a stringed instrument at a very, very young age. Wouldn't it be amazing if young people are so very comfortable using music technology from that age, not because they've kind of worked out how to do it themselves, but actually because they've actually been able to utilize this technology in a supported way in a learning environment in school. And I think going on from that, it would be interesting to see how suppliers can support with that in terms of, you know, sort of edifying, you know, the you know, teaching resources to help support that. And I think that for me is quite key. I'm certainly not someone who is from a music technology background. I think the internet was just about going for me after I was about 20 something. So, you know, I can appreciate that it may not feel immediately empowering to some staff who are teachers who are not immediately having that access in their world as well. So I think that's a good consideration.
Tim, you wanted to come in on that?
And I'm muted just because I noticed that my son's just come home from school. So but I just, you know, just thinking about music technology as well, I think it's a great opportunity here. But one thing that strikes me is that I have a higher education background, and in higher education, there's so much research that involves music and the use of technology. It's a huge theme of the research output that comes out of universities. Yet to completely disregard it for early years seems a little bit old-fashioned. I think it's a great opportunity, though, for suppliers of music technology to actually work with educationalists to build a framework that can be implemented into school. I've done so many webinars and conversations with people thinking, you know, I work for RSL Awards, and we have the world's only accredited music technology syllabus for grades. Just a small plug, which I think is important to put in there at some point. But you know, we work with so many different people to try and think about, well, how do you build the framework for music technology so that you can teach it? And actually, when suppliers are coming up with the products which people can use in schools, to be able to give them that framework as well, and give them the confidence to start using it. Because I think a lot of teachers, especially non-musical teachers, at the moment, what they're looking for is the confidence that they've got the right gear, they know how to, you know, the basic functions of how to use things, so that they can start communicating, so they don't have to fall back into sort of perhaps older techniques as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a great opportunity.
It's a bit of a double whammy, isn't it? Because if you're not confident working in music, and you're not confident working in technology, then you're double locked out, right? And so, but the other thing I want to say about music technology from an inclusive perspective is, in terms of disability, in terms of seeing yourself in a creative space outside of school in the broader media. I mean, music technology has got a fantastic role to play in that as well, you know, and from the whole inclusion and accessibility perspective, it's incredibly powerful, isn't it? And for something so powerful for diversity and inclusion not to be mentioned in the curriculums, it is worrying in itself. But yeah, I don't want to be negative about it, but I just want to kind of holistically say that, you know, one of the things I was always very excited about working in the classroom was working with the music that the children bring in the classroom with them, with their music, because they've heard more music now than they have any generation before has heard music. And technology, whether using it, in my case, technology and trombones, that well-known combination, you know, it's great for getting the music that the children are bringing in the classroom with them into your working practice. And then that's a great platform to move off and explore other pieces of music that they perhaps wouldn't be aware of. But you've opened this great channel of cooperation and communication by treating their musical language as your musical language and making that communication work as well. And I think technology is superb for that usage.
And that speaks very nicely to the next topic that we had defined, because obviously technology and traditional music making, there has to be a sense of diversity in what we're doing, and how do we use the model music curriculum as a starting point, and how much should teachers be tailoring that to suit the particular intake and character of their schools.
I'll jump on that one. I guess that's maybe one of the strengths from it being a model, is that you can take it, and I've read it, and I'm not a kind of key stage 1 and 2 expert, although I do find myself doing more and more of that. But just being able to look at it and just start to think, okay, about progression in certain areas, but not be necessarily told how to do it because I'm constrained to, I mean, I do a small amount in first schools every week, so it might be 20 minutes. So just to have something as a way of, okay, why don't I try and have a little bit of this progression? I mean, I find that quite useful. And I think, I mean, we're going to come back to this a lot about how music teachers that are maybe more experienced can then help with this and come in and look at it with them and say, right, what have you got? What can we do with it? You know, how can we best impact the students? And I mean, it's going back slightly to the previous point, but I think this is where the industry and people making the software and the hardware and everything can be and should be providing some support with that. And I've done some work with Future DJs that are a fantastic organisation, and they've been really looking at, okay, we're providing Soundtrap and we're providing this DJing course, but actually how can it link into a curriculum? And they're really fantastic at that, and they're coming up with some great resources, which is helpful for teachers. So yeah, I think it's certainly something that you can then tailor to your school situation, but you've got to have some vision, haven't you, for that, and you've got to have some enthusiasm to do it. And I don't think any document, however well written, would inject that enthusiasm. And I guess that's then the responsibility of the sector and teachers and organisations to do that, to kind of say, right, come on, what are we going to do, and almost provide a how can we help with your scenario. And I'm certainly keen to do that more as I with friends and colleagues in other schools.
Right.
Just wondered if I could come in on that as well, because I think the value word is actually very, very important. You know, how much is music valued, because that's where the currency comes from. I think that's where you know, the respect for learning and the desire to know more, to achieve more, to want to explore more, it comes from having that sort of implicit value within the school community. And I think that's a very important thing. I think coming back to the document itself, it's again, you know, it's been, I think James said it earlier, it's a model, so it's something to take and go forward. I think if the value is there, if it's valued within that school community, then there will be a desire to take that forward and use your imagination more. I think, for example, when you look at the MMC document in terms of repertoire, you can look at that repertoire and say, well, okay, there's some stock lists at you know, the different key stage levels, but actually you can also look at the facets that are being taught within that, and then apply them to, any number of different aspects of music from within your own knowledge, but also within your school groups community as well. Draw on what they have, and I think there's then a cross fertilization of learning that's actually even more exciting as a result of that. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily again, it's picked up. The other word that's in my mind is time. Do teachers find that they've got the time to think like that? To think, because all of a sudden you're having to think super creatively about, how can I apply the knowledge that I have in terms of my learning experiences, or to infuse the class group into thinking along those lines and thinking out of the box and really getting those values and being able to talk about different values in terms of rhythm and harmony, all of those things, to find that within a really much wider sort of tonal palette through different repertoire that doesn't exist on the document itself, but is created by the individual.
Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I just to build on what you're saying, Roger, I just wonder whether actually it would have been more successful not to include repertoire in the first place at all, because I think certainly when I read it, the first thing I thought was, I'm just not very impressed by this choice of repertoire. This doesn't feel good. I think in the press release, I love this. Pupils will be encouraged to listen to classical music such as Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, rock and roll like Little Richard and Elvis Presley, jazz like Nina Simone, and modern classics such as Queen. I mean, just in that one sentence, there are 6 different value propositions and difficulties with those value propositions.
I think in fairness, Tim, that might be one of the worst press releases ever written, or worse than the document.
It's certainly challenging, isn't it? Yeah. But so actually, let's take an example, or a practical example that I see every day. So we make graded examination books, right? And and a lot of research goes into what those levels should be like. So on a practical basis, I look after a company that's making curricula every day, and we have to go through those processes, and we spend an enormous amount of time thinking about the range, the diversity. Our duty as educators also to introduce people to wider ranges of music and not limit themselves. So we spend an awful lot of time doing that. On top of that, we also exemplify what those things are. So just like you say, Roger, when you look at that piece of music and say, great, well, this is put in for Key Stage 1. I think the big question that needed to have been answered within the document is, why is that suitable for that particular range? So actually as a teacher, you can do your proper teacher job, which is to find the stuff which really interests your students and understand what it is. So I would think that if you're a non-music specialist and you're looking at that document and you see that Wild Man by Kate Bush is a good example of pop music at Key Stage 1, and then you try and teach from that could be quite difficult. But if you understood which bits of wild music were really, really good and really, really appropriate, then that would be much more beneficial. So again, coming back to what can people practically do to help support music in schools, is actually to find education programs that work with to actually exemplify what those stages could look like, and I think that could be really successful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. To weave technology back into that as well. I think that the technology companies, now I might be wrong, but this is my experience, it's a bit of a top-down, trickle-down kind of world, and one thing we try to do is look at the specific educational problems for our instruments at the very early stage of learning and develop stuff from scratch to sort out and help that environment. And I think this might be a bit of a call to the music technology community to say, listen, look at Key Stage 1, look at Key Stage 2, and do some serious hardware software integration development about learning at that level and integrating that to instruments outside technology as well. Bring all that together with a curriculum repertoire list that suits both the teacher and the pupils. And I think we kind of start to rock and roll a bit there. That's all sounding good. But not any non-specialist can say, well, I want to do a bit about electric electronic music. So maybe I'll start with some like Kylie, and I'll go back through, Soft Cell. I might end up going through some 70s stuff, some prog rock, some Yes. Go back to the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, and we'll end up at Music Concrete and Messiaen, writing down Birdsong. That's not easy for a non-specialist to put those kind of connections and journeys together, is it? I mean, you're right, Tim. Somebody needs to write programs that are resourced and unpacked so that it can be delivered easily by the non-specialist,
But also we should be positive, because there are people that are doing this and doing really, really well. And actually, perhaps curating some of those resources would be a useful thing to do. And
sharing best practice. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not difficult to find. I mean, without wanting to endorse particular people that in a public forum, but I can think of 5 or 10 really great introduction programs that would do those types of things, and there's plenty of different ways to do that. But I think in terms of the repertoire, I think that it definitely needed to hit a bit more of a diverse range, and I would suggest that if you're reading the document, ignore it and look through perhaps the suggestions which could have been thought through in a slightly different way, and then you might find it more useful.
I mean, I get my hope though is that because obviously for me, I don't need help with the repertoire list, because I love listening to music and discovering music, and I love responding to what students suggest. I mean, you have to be a bit careful sometimes, don't you, with when a student says type this into YouTube, sir, and not sure about that. But maybe there are people out there, I mean, I'm slightly playing the devil's advocate on this conversation, that actually went, oh, that's great, I've got a starting point here with some, because as musicians, we are plugged into things and we listen to things, whereas again, I don't like to criticise a piece of music, but I'm always baffled when the Lark Ascending seems to win the Classic FM every year Hall of Fame. And I think there's loads of other pieces out there that are fantastic. Come on, everybody. But it might be that there are teachers that think, oh great, I've got a starting point now. And lots of teachers on one of the primary Facebook groups have kind of made these playlists, and I'm thinking, well, that's probably quite a good start, because in one of the first schools I go into, that's something that I've been able to help them with. What can you play to them, and that's where we then need to come in and go, okay, so how can we build on that? What have you learned from this repertoire? What do you feel you didn't have, and try and help them. And I would imagine these kind of playlists and things will start to crop up more and more, where as first school, primary school, early years teachers start to discover pieces that work really well. So that's what I hope, and maybe just helping to say, okay, well, a good repertoire list would help them to look at a whole range of things, but also empower teachers to not be afraid to say, what are you listening to, and why do you like it? Yeah. And you don't need to be able to analyze it. Just that question alone was often one I asked in lockdown. What have you listened to? Why do you like it? And I don't even need to listen to it. I don't need to notate it and put it on the board. I don't need to know what key it's in. I just need to know that they've engaged in that. And that's what I hope starts to happen with teachers and these repertoire lists. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think, James, I was kind of focusing a bit on Key Stage 1 and 2 there, really, because obviously I think there's a greater depth of knowledge at Key Stage 3 without a doubt. So want to make that clear.
Hopefully, although some teachers are thrown into the teaching of music without I mean, there can be some tough situations. So I guess it might be useful for somebody. I mean, I had a situation where a school had somebody leave after a couple of days, and had somebody teaching who had absolutely no idea what they were doing at all with music, and they fully admitted that. But something like this would have been a starting point. And I think that's the important thing, is it is a starting point, because a repertoire list needs to evolve and grow, doesn't it, all the time?
So if you distill it down to a genre list, the genre list isn't too bad. I didn't think. If you looked at all the genres that were covered, that's not too bad. but then you find out that some of the genres have only got 2 pieces in them, you know. But you know, that's definitely a step in the right direction. I thought the genre breadth was a step in the right direction, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, because there's stuff that some, you know, like the world of computer game music and things like that is just amazing, and kids really engage with, and all there's just so much out there, and you know, I kind of always get frustrated when, you know, recently there's been a big movement in terms of diversity of composers from different backgrounds, and female composers, and that's something I've always sought out. And isn't it frustrating that people are suddenly discovering these people and go, wow, this person was writing great music? It's like, well, yeah, they were. Why is it taking so long? So yeah,
I'd come in on that, James, because I think there's 2 great points for me on that. One was just you talking about computer music, because actually that is a professional career path actually that people can take later on in life. People don't know that, generally speaking, up until about the age of, you know, sort of 18 and going on to tertiary education. This is a wonderful thing to try and you know, at least shed light on for early years. And the other thing, just you right in my head there, just about the diversity. And I think wouldn't it be great to be able to talk about diversity through this repertoire, not just in terms of ethnicity, but also, you know, enabling knowledge at early years level of in terms of balanced gender involvement in the creative process. I think all of these things are there actually waiting to be drawn out of the document. So it's, you know, it is there. It's just about sort of creative thinking, and maybe that needs to be just put more on a plate so that you know, it can be used more potently in the teaching scenario itself.
Tim.
Well, just to build on that, again, you know, I wanted to pick up Chris's point about genre, because I think, yeah, on the face of it, when you first look at it, you can go, oh, okay, that's great, you know, there's treasure, but there's a lot of value propositions within the definitions of those genre as well.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, to think that that music, any music which is old has to be from the Western classical music tradition I think is a misnomer. And actually, you know, to say that, you know, that classical music is only, you know, German is difficult actually in a number of ways. So I think, you know, clearly there's been some efforts, you know, to think about, you know, the term world music, I think, is difficult as well for a lot of people now. So, you know, and there have been efforts to kind of use the right nomenclature just to make sure that, you know, we have an inclusive document. But I think there are some failings there as well. So I would just kind of watch those value judgments, and it can be really useful as a starting point, as we keep on saying. And I wonder if this is a theme, certainly one which I reflect on, is that actually, you know, nice try, but actually, you know, maybe it was delayed by a year anyway. Maybe we should have spent another year delaying this to really get it right. You know, this is non-statutory guidance. And that's an important thing to stress as well, isn't it? You know, schools are not enforced to use this, and it is just a model, and that's really, really positive. But it is non-statutory, and I think that, you know, I would take this that what we could do, especially as a music industry, is come up with some good principles about how people should approach making curricula in the first place, so that they can be empowered to make that curricula as well. And there are some good points that we can take from the MMC in that respect.
Can I also just suggest, just on that point, just for me, this document could be the beginning of the decolonization process more generally in terms of repertoire. It could be the genus of that spreads further afield in terms of, I know about obviously the work that you're doing, Tim, which is great, but, you know, just looking at you know, what is used a lot in terms of music hubs, in terms of curricula for you know, from the performing side of things, in terms of examinations. You know, this would nicely feed into a wider acceptance that actually, you know, the other curricula do not need to look like this in terms of their syllabus that's being rolled out with different exam boards as well. And I think that's quite
Tim
important.
said earlier on, this is an opportunity for us as a community to create the other model curriculum, several of them from lots of different perspectives, maybe even using this as a framework that's applying different views on what repertoire is and means, right? It's not, because as you say, Tim, it's not just what the repertoire is, but it's what's implicit underlying in the way the repertoire list has been built, so I think there's a great opportunity for the industry to do that as well. I mean, we're often talking about and we all have been heavily or are connected to the education industry, if you want to call it that, but there's the broader music industry. We can all get involved in this. Every one of us could be involved in a positive way.
And building on that, obviously the MMC is about what happens in classrooms at key stages 1 to 3, but of course the main aim of anybody who's teaching music and is passionate about teaching music is for that passion in the children, in the pupils, to then spread outside of the classroom, so that it's a passion for music and a love of music, appreciating, playing, creating music. How can the music industry, the suppliers and the retailers, grasp onto that and provide some opportunities and pathways for a diverse variety of young people to take that engagement beyond the classroom?
So, okay.
Any thoughts?
I mean, one thing I would suggest for all manufacturers and retailers of music is that education should be a key strand of their activities, because without education as a key strand of their activities, there's an opportunity missed to connect with the bedrock of what's going on. We work with lots of manufacturers in the work that we do, because people can see that actually, if you get a bedrock of musical learning happening, that actually, you'll get 100 people start, and then by the end of it, you'll end up with 10 people who are really proficient musicians who have music in their whole lives, and that will progress the industry of manufacturing and of retail. So I think that it makes perfect sense to do that, and I don't just think that music is in a school setting.
No, I think that's really important.
Yeah, again, this document doesn't connect with the fact that actually there is so much musical involvement, understanding, and learning that happens outside. I thought the Youth Music Report that was published in 2018, someone told me if it's 2019, I can't remember, which looked at the level of engagement. And someone on the panel already said this today, young people are exposed to more music than ever before. And music is free and accessible, and people don't care about where music comes from. Kids don't look at, genres in the same way that they used to. It's not, there's a lot less of this kind of tribal element of I like rock music or et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a real opportunity to kind of build something that can feed into schools and sit around school learning as well. So I would encourage any music retailer to think about the way they support their local schools, and all music manufacturers to think about what their education program does to really build a bedrock.
I totally agree, and I think that's the kind of exciting thing about this document has had this. It's just brought everyone together, which is quite interesting, really. And you suddenly find yourself sitting, chatting about it, and talking about music, and debating it, and throwing things up in the air, and it's that's really exciting. And I think now kind of the dust is settling on it, as we move forward, if we can suddenly have businesses and software developers and hardware, everyone just working together on this, it's really exciting. And I do love what you say there about the kind of the home aspect of the learning, and I think that's one thing where music technology is fantastic. And the good side of the pandemic, if we can look for a positive with it, is that students have been suddenly making music at home, and that if you're in a school setting where extracurricular music is is tricky, then now you can actually be providing a soundtrack license or whatever it might be to students to be making music at home and exploring that, and then they can be doing the RSL production awards, and then they can be, and all of those benefits that can come with it. And I think that's really exciting, and I would urge teachers to really engage and be writing to companies that are providing things and seeing what they're doing for education, because that's how we're going to move things forward, and that's how I guess that's how you're going to sell software and hardware to kids at home if they want to.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that, James. I think what's interesting from the Youth Music Report is that a vast number of particularly Key Stage 3 children are doing exactly that, and it's not connected to school at all. We sell, as an industry, we sell far more to people who aren't learning in a formal environment than we do to people who are learning in a formal environment.
And why aren't schools?
It'd be great to connect all that together, wouldn't it?
Why aren't schools? I mean, I'd be mortified if I found out that one of my students was some famous musician who was making music on YouTube. That would be awful. And
it's interesting you say that. I mean, I did a project once in a big, posh state secondary school with a sixth form department, and we did a kind of creative ensemble where you didn't have to be able to read; you could just turn up and make music. And I stood at the door of the hallway of the hall with a head of music. It was a great head of music, right? And all these people walking. He's like, "Josh, what are you doing here?" "Well, I brought my guitar, sir." "Oh, what are you doing here?" "Oh, I've got a drum kit, but I'll use yours." And there's about 50% of the guys, the teacher knew really well, didn't realise that they played at all.
Yeah.
And these guys were really high level players, right? People who probably were working on a grade 8 rock school guitar, So that was fascinating. And it was a revelation for him, really was, a positive revelation, right?
And we do need to be getting to know our students. I mean, and it is hard. I mean, I teach, in year 9, 240 boys, and I haven't seen a lot of them this year because of the pandemic. And you're teaching them for an hour a week, or the other couple of years ago it was on a carousel, so you barely knew what day it was. You barely knew who they were. It was just, and it's really tricky. And I think that's where we need to be encouraging that. Asking.
This teacher I'm talking about wasn't incompetent; he was fantastic. The kids had deliberately hidden it from him.
It's encouraging that openness, isn't it? So that children feel like they can approach and make it that they do these things and that it matters to them. Just to interject slightly, if anybody does want to ask any questions from the floor, you can use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll try and feed those questions in as we possibly can. James, I think you were going to come back with something there anyway, weren't you?
I can't remember what it was. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is that whole idea of extending the learning out of the classroom is really exciting, and the fact that you can almost be running these kind of parallel curriculums. It's not the word homework, is it? It's homework is a bit dull. We want to be getting them doing music at home and almost it running concurrently, and that's what's really exciting. Imagine if you were inspiring them in the classroom, modeling stuff to them, and then they were going home and doing that, the practical side of things at home. And certainly in a situation where you may not have as many lessons, or you may not have a specialist classroom, or whatever it might be, that actually technology can really help with that. And I love the thought. My wife teaches year 4, and I was talking to her yesterday about what would happen if you gave your year 4s a soundtrack license for a half a term, and just had to play around with it at home, maybe did a Zoom, and just this chance to just say, right, let's try and conjure, be a bit creative in the younger years, rather than it being, when you're lower down, we'll learn about the elements and we'll do some clapping and singing, and that's it, which is all very helpful. But actually, imagine if they were suddenly starting to use a DAW and they were 7 years old, and then when they got to you later on, I mean, that's just what I think is so exciting. We've got to work out how to do that. And actually, the teacher, you don't even need a specialist teacher. If you've got a music teacher that's keen, you could do a Zoom for however many hundreds of children and say, right, how about this? And so the idea of music being suddenly just outside of the classroom it's so exciting. Lots of potential.
And James, just to come in on that, I think that's the opportunity that we've got to keep on stressing to the MIA members, is that actually the majority of music teachers in primary schools are non-specialists, so they need those types of resources, and and they're an open market for people to sell to, if they are supported products.
220,000, I think.
So definitely worth putting into a business plan, at least to have a look at whether that flies. I just also wanted to bring up another thing that comes through in the MMC is this kind of feeding through of progression into GCSE, and I think there are a number of assumptions here. One of the big assumptions is that you can only be successful in music if you do GCSE and A-level music, because I can tell you that that's not true. Without going too much into detail about my own past, I can tell you that you do not necessarily need GCSE and A-level music to be a successful and brilliant musician.
I haven't got A-level music.
Yeah. Okay, great. I haven't got A-level music either, and I've had a #1 in Japan, so but you don't need, you don't necessarily need to do that. I mean, whilst everyone talks about how GCSE and A-level music are declining in terms of their uptake, and that may well be the case, looking at the stats which are published every year, it seems pretty clear that it is. People aren't really looking at the vocational alternative qualifications, which are growing massively in popularity. I mean, we run them, and we've seen a huge rise, as have other awarding bodies in their vocational. So what we learn from that is make the subject matter really relevant and adaptable to your students, and you will see a massive growth, whether that's in school or outside of school, as long as the students feel as if what they're doing is authentic, real, connected, interesting. So I'm just thinking about, well, what are the things which we need to remember when we're constructing curricula? And there is, without going into too much detail about educational theorists, there's a theorist called Hirsch who comes up with the idea of core knowledge, that actually to be a successful person, you need to have certain elements of knowledge. And it's not just music, this is wider pedagogy. And that's very much been used and influenced the writing of this document. And I would suggest that there are many people that would critique that and say, actually, that's not necessarily the best way to respond to the needs of students. So I'd look further into actually what is the pedagogy that you want to employ. I would say thinking about inspiring and encouraging students is a really great way to start.
And I guess it's all developing understanding of things, and then from there looking at the different ways of expressing that and taking that forward, I think is really key. I did just want to pick up on the whole specialist word, because I've thought a lot about that, and I was on another one of these panels the other day talking about that, and I think my wife is a first school teacher, so I look at the diverse range of things that she teaches, and she's not a history specialist or a science specialist or an English specialist, or they don't turn. Whereas with music, we talk about being specialists, and actually I think that going back to the empowering, it's saying, well, if we keep saying, oh, well, you're not a specialist, but I am, like we're some kind of Marvel character, actually that's going to do some real damage. And I think we need to start to break down those barriers of saying, do you know what, you can do something really useful for me, and I say that to first school teachers. If this song I'm singing, or these rhythms that I've been clapping, or if you'd ask them what crescendo is at some point, or just or play them this, or if you could do that, that's brilliant. And actually I think that there's lots of teachers that maybe are feeling disenfranchised because they think that music is this really reserved for the rich and the wealthy and the really intelligent, whereas actually it's something for everybody. And I guess that's what we need to be doing, and that goes back to what you're saying about the vocational things as well, because my school don't run a vocational music offering at the moment, but it's something that I'm constantly banging on about, and so it's quite tricky. And I do want students to be doing music GCSE, but we just have to maybe just change some of the narrative around music and make it just something that is much more accessible and much easier. And I think the same with notation. I know that's a big taboo thing with people, but again, we can get really het up about notation being really difficult to teach children, and will they understand it? But I think they can, and they should have the opportunity to learn about that. But if we only ever do that and we say, oh, sorry, no, yeah, you read tab, we don't do that, or that, you know, it's just, that's ridiculous. But we've got to give them that opportunity. So I think the whole idea of specialism, I think maybe we're doing ourselves a disservice as a music sector if we don't kind of make it really that children and young people and teachers can grasp.
I tell you what, James, I couldn't agree. I think what you've just said is so important, because if we imagine how much interaction a key stage 2 teacher has with every single subject that's on the agenda, personally, they've probably got a much closer connection to music than nearly any other subject in their personal life, right? And there's this great quote that I know, James, you'll know this, but maybe the guys as well. I've been reading the ISM document on the purpose of learning music recently, which is quite useful. And there's a great quote from the 80s that says the true rudiments of music are sensitivity to and delight in sound and its expressive qualities. You know, I think that's a fantastic sentence to start discussion about a learning journey in music, you know. And I think that there are very few people now that don't have a delight in sound and its expressive quality, because music's everywhere, whether it's in games, lists, films, TV programs. Music's everywhere, and we've got a higher quality of music to listen to now than we've ever had before, you know.
Matthew,
sorry.
I was just going to comment in reference to your last question about you know, how the industry can best support development of the curriculum for the benefit of everyone. And you know, I'm sure it's a well-trodden road and a bit of a hot potato, but I just wonder, you know, how, you know, we know what is the situation with music provision in the UK, and I just wonder, what can the industry do to support socioeconomically challenged areas of need, in particular? Because, you know, we're talking about things like DAWs, for example, but you need a platform to be able to operate that on, you know, and we know that in some areas that's a real problem. You know, it's a real problem. You've got, you know, young people working from, you know, from phones, or, you know, don't have access to technology at home. And you know, I know, as I say, it feels like a hot potato because we know what that means in terms of the support that I'm suggesting comes forward in that way. But I think it's a really pertinent question, and I think it's something that needs to be asked when we look at, for example, Tim's observation about how, you know, when we look at GCSE and A level in terms of take up of classes, how that's gone down. We know, you know, a large part of that has got to do with, you know, just the socioeconomic challenge of young people and families growing up in you know, challenging areas today. We see the students who are, you know, going to conservatoires and what their backgrounds are more generally, and just going forward in the profession, what the, you know, the backgrounds of successful musicians are. So I think in terms of trying to support the curriculum in the best interest of everyone, it's, for me, that's a really pertinent question to ask. And it would be great to have an answer back at some point.
I think that's that's a really valuable question, actually, hot potato or not, and I think it's something that we can bring into at some point one of our MIA Friday drop-in sessions, as a discussion point with manufacturers and suppliers. And I think it's getting this message across that today's supported young musicians are tomorrow's musicians who will be customers and create the joy in music making and be part of music's future and music moving forward.
I think, Matt, that's also suppliers, manufacturers, and retailers, right?
Yes. Absolutely, it is. Yeah.
And I think as well, kind of wrapping some of these thoughts together, it's like not saying the no for the children in terms of thinking that we know what they like or don't like, and it's kind of that big mistake, and not holding something back from them because we think, oh, they won't enjoy that or they won't be able to do that. And I think the same with, we can even do it with a classical musician thinking, oh, they're not going to be interested in using Ableton, or they're not going to be interested in doing this, whereas actually they probably are, because you know they're and so I think it's about just not holding back with this, and just, you know, giving children an opportunity. And I think that's the same with, I mean, I know earlier on I kind of said about listening to a piece of music and just saying why you like it, but I think some of the MMC and what's behind it, and some of our role is to actually help them to develop a skill set, and I think that teachers in the primary sector can also do that, of just actually how can we start to really get inside and unpack a piece of music, and that can be done. And I think going with the whole diverse, with the kind of the issue with, as you say, you can have a free DAW, but if you haven't got a laptop, it's not much good, is it? And I think that is just a really important thing to look at. How can we get music out there to young people? Because it's just it isn't fair, is it? It's just not right that we have.
Well, if we're interested in levelling up the country, then music's on the one hand is the perfect leveler, but on the other hand, without the resources to make it happen, we can't achieve the socioeconomic benefits. So maybe, here's a hot potato right back at you. Maybe the plan's a great thing, the curriculum's a great thing, because if we all stand around as a community and say, listen, this is really, the intent of this, Tim, is really good, and we really want to implement it, but I tell you what, these are the resource gaps. So
yeah, I agree.
How can we as a community, government, industry, local community, how can we create a resource that makes this live and thrive, is a very good question, but it's a broader question than just what, ask the manufacturers to give you a bigger educational discount, you know.
But there's lobbying that we need to do to government as well as an industry, you know, to support the calls, you know, for digital poverty to be eradicated, because that's just, you know, it's just not something which should even be a thing in the modern day and age. But also, you know, if you look at the way in which and we started on this, you know, with obviously James being a brilliant classroom teacher, well resourced with the right things. And I actually do know that, James, because I've heard it from more than one person about how, you know, what a model, the type of thing that you do should be. But actually, if you look at the decline in music teachers in state schools versus the decline in music teachers in independent schools, and the ISM published some figures about that, you know, 29% of state schools have seen a reduction in number of qualified music teachers in secondary schools, whereas that's only 5% in independent schools. You know, that is going to lead us to an inequality where privileged areas have the ability to teach music and engage kids, and that will then support support the inequalities that we continue to see. You know, of music being something for people who come from a privileged background only. So I think we've got, you know, we need to make sure that everyone is cognizant of that glaring inequality that is only going to be propagated unless we fix this.
I mean, we're not in a trajectory of levelling up, but not as much as we'd like. We're in the trajectory of the opposite of levelling up. You know, we're not. So I went to a very, very bog standard state school, and music provision was fantastic, as it was in most of the state schools in my area at the time. Only at Key Stage 3, not at Key Stage 2. Times have changed. But that kind of provision for straight estate kids like me is not there at the moment, quite often, you know, and we're going that way, not that way. You know, we're not leveling up. We're creating more a bigger gap between the top and the bottom at the moment. Is my take on it. You know, that's not a scientific research point of view.
I think in a sense we've naturally come to a point where we've answered the final question that I posed before this webinar, which was, what does success look like? And we've talked about all the things that mean success for the model music curriculum, and the things that it can prompt educators, the music industry, retailers, suppliers, manufacturers, everybody involved to move the conversation forward in terms of use of technology, diversity in music, wider opportunities in music, and making music something which isn't just a background thing in people's lives, but where people feel able to express themselves openly, and to be part of music without having to wear some special badge that says, you know, I fit a particular box, therefore I am. So at this point, there's no questions from the floor. I know a couple of panel members, Roger and James, have got other things to go on to this evening. So I'd like to thank everybody involved very much for sharing your experience and wisdom and thoughts. And it would be great to pick this conversation up within the MIA, within further drop-ins and discussions as time goes on. So thank you very much, and all the best to all of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.